Does life suck always? Are you miserable all the time? Does getting out of bed feel like a task with difficulty on par with reaching the moon on a pogo stick? Does it feel impossible to focus on anything other than YouTube, Fortnite, and the backs of your eyelids? And whenever you try to focus on something like school or work or a passion project, you always somehow end up back on YouTube, Fortnite, or within the black abyss behind your nictitating membrane? Does the idea of socializing with your fellow humans terrify you to the point that the cashier at Walmart seems more like an offspring of Satan himself rather than the sweet old lady that she is? This must mean you have major depression or ADHD or anxiety disorder, right? You probably have a chemical imbalance or genetic or psychological illness, right? Something is wrong with you and you need medical help to get it fixed, right? Your brain is the problem, nothing else, right? Maybe or maybe not. That's what I'm here to talk about today. So sit back, relax, and get ready to have your head blown off as we dive into the, by definition, insane world of mental illness. But before we start, I should clarify. The title is not supposed to mean that mental illness as a whole is a lie, but rather that there is a lie within the subject of mental illness, and a pretty massive and equally sinister one at that. I probably should also say that I am here to shout at you mostly about ADHD and depression, and a few of the ideas I talk about could be said about anxiety as well. I'm not going to talk much, if at all, about any sort of psychosis, bipolar disorder, PTSD, OCD, autism, or basically anything else. It's probably a bad idea to be applying the more controversial things I talk about in this video to anything that's not depression or ADHD or anxiety. Okie dokie artichoke? Alright, with that being said, let's start from the very beginning. Traditionally, there have been three classifications of theories as to the root cause of mental illness: somatogenic, psychogenic, and, well, ghost. Somatogenic theory is the idea that mental illness is caused by one's own body, meaning that according to this theory, mental disorders could be caused by genetics, sickness, or if your idiot friend threw a rock in your general direction with the intention of missing but actually hit you straight in the back of the head. True fucking story. Buddy, I know you're watching this. I do not forgive you. Psychogenic theory is the idea that, well, psychological issues come from psychological problems, not physical ones. Extremely stressful experiences, trauma, or negative learned associations could be the cause of mental illness according to this theory. And according to supernatural theories, well, ghosts. Mental illness is not a new thing. In fact, we were no strangers to it even in our very first recorded civilization, ancient Mesopotamia. In Mesopotamia, hands represented control. And if you've ever had a mental illness, you would know that it does a very nice job of taking control of one's life. And according to them, you know what else had control? Deities. So, mental illnesses were known as the hands of certain deities, like the hand of Ishtar and the hand of Shamash. If we skip ahead to the witch trials, we see it there too. Not everyone who is accused of being a witch was mentally ill, but everybody who is mentally ill was probably accused of being a witch. Then again, I don't know, man. I know it was a different time and all, but the people who went around tossing people on bonfires because they accused them of being magical evil witches, to me, kind of sound like the real mentally ill ones. I don't know anything about anything though. In the late 16 to 1700s, mental illness was beginning to be seen as less of a spiritual thing and more of a human brain thing. So, instead of throwing the mentally ill on bonfires, they used their kindness and understanding to help the mentally ill. By throwing them in asylums and treating them like animals. Yes, human compassion is beautiful, isn't it? To be fair, in the end of the 1700s, a movement for the moral treatment of the mentally ill began to develop, albeit very slowly. In the 1800s, industrialization caused a boom in the population, which caused a boom in the number and size of, you guessed it, insane asylums. This led to some new diagnostic terms being created, and at last, in 1808, the term psychiatry was officially coined. Things started to get better in the 1900s. Psychoanalysis became a thing. Insane asylums are now psychiatric hospitals. Inmates are now patients. Yippee, I guess. In 1948, lithium became the first psychiatric drug. Then, 4 years later, the discovery of chlorpromazine led to some monies, which then led to some more interest in the field. And Julius Axelrod uncovered some useful properties of neurotransmitters, which gave a base to the creation of new psychiatric medicines. A lot was learned in the last century, but it didn't come without its fair share of hiccups. But hey, trial and error, am I right? For example, electrocuting people and calling it therapy. That one failed. Let's try lobotomies. Oh gee, that one failed too. How about prescribing diazepam and other sedatives? Oh no, no! Now there's an epidemic of dependence. Oh shit. Fuck. We have made mistakes, but we've still discovered an amazing amount of information from them. We have come a very, very long way. And although we probably shouldn't be so proud of our history in this field, at least we can be proud of our accomplishments and where we are now. We have learned so much, and now in this modern day, we are practically experts in the field of psychiatry. Nobody knows what causes mental disorders still, you dumbass. Oh. Maybe not experts? The question of what causes mental illness is probably one of the most important in all of psychiatry. And there are a few theories, but we still don't know the answer. We may not know the causes of mental illnesses, but we do know very well the effects. A disability-adjusted life year depicts a year of life with good health lost due to disability or premature death. Worldwide, mental health issues are the most common causes of disability. It's estimated that roughly 20% of all days of good health are lost because of mental problems. Major depressive disorder is the cause of 65.5 million disability-adjusted life years. 65 million healthy years lost. There are an estimated 10 to 20 million non-fatal suicide attempts every single year. In 2021 alone, 48,183 attempts succeeded. This is not good. But we can take comfort in the fact that we as a species are at least trying to do something about it. There are a few methods we use to treat mental illnesses, and one of these methods is psychotherapy. When you imagine the word therapy, unless you're imagining some sort of physical therapy, psychotherapy is probably what pops up in your head. It's when there's somebody probably sitting on a couch and another somebody probably sitting at a desk wearing glasses because they're a total nerd. And the somebody sitting on the couch is probably babbling about their problems, and the somebody sitting at the desk is probably writing something down and nodding and saying something like, The point of this little interaction is to try and help the person sitting on the couch become happier and live better by helping them change their behavior in a positive way or helping them overcome their problems. Outside influences have an effect on mental illness. Social stress, trauma, mistreatment, issues with employment, and any lone wolves watching, loneliness can all affect or cause mental disorders in some way. Psychotherapy works because its goal is to diagnose these issues in the patient's life and help the patient vanquish their problems by making good lifestyle changes. What I'm about to say is not a professional opinion or idea or whatever, it's just my 2 cents. But if your life absolutely and unequivocally sucks but you're low on the muns, just find somebody who you at least half trust, who at least half cares about you, who's half intelligent and half mature and has a half decent life, and sit them down so it's just the two of you, and dig deep and talk to them about your problems. Maybe you'll come up with a solution, maybe you won't, but you'll at least get a closer relationship with the person. Or maybe they'll think you're batshit insane and never talk to you again. But hey, I'd rather have someone hate me for who I truly am than love me for who I am not. Generally, psychotherapy has a pretty good track record, but not a perfect one. Hans Eysenck, a trailblazer in testing different psychotherapy methods, which there are many of, said that psychotherapy is completely useless. The only method he said worked was behavioral therapy. But I wouldn't say he's the best source of information on psychotherapy because it's been revealed that he falsified data showing that behavioral therapy was way more effective than it actually was. Journals retracted 14 of his papers and issued 64 statements of concern about his publications. What the hell? Why'd he do that? I don't know, and I don't care enough to care. There hasn't been much research on the possible negative outcomes of psychotherapy, but it's been said that psychotherapy may make symptoms worse in 3 to 15% of patients, depending on certain traits of the patient and therapist. It's possible that the patient will develop therapy dependence or even the developing of new symptoms and blah 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 blah, but if you've read the warning label on literally anything related to anything in the medical world, you would see that something as harmless as a bar of soap probably has a warning that says, has the potential to recreate 9/11. So if you want to take your advice from a red smiley face on the internet who has no idea what he's talking about, I'd say psychotherapy is generally pretty risk-free and very worth it. Now, is this video sponsored by BetterHelp? It'd be pretty damn cool if it was, but I say naughty words and get no views, so no. But hey, BetterHelp, hit me up if you're interested, eh? I am completely broke, and I'll give you a quick example of how good I would be at selling your product. Ahem. In the modern world, depression and anxiety are at an all-time high. And there has been a terrible trend in recent years, the sensationalizing and glamorizing of mental illness. There are many people out there who believe that mental illness is a part of who they are. They think it's unchangeable, it's part of their identity. I know because I used to be one of them. But I've come to learn that depression and anxiety is not a part of who you are. You are so much more than that. You are a human being. You deserve happiness. And you can obtain happiness. You can have a better life. You can overcome this. I did, and so can you. All you need is a little help, which is okay. There's no shame in it. That's what it took for me too. With BetterHelp, happiness is only a click away. Check out BetterHelp for more. So, how'd I do, eh? Did I do good? Yeah? No? Probably not, but it was worth a shot. Psychotherapy is a lot less controversial than the use of medication for the treatment of mental illness. There are an unknowable amount of unknowable effects of these kinds of medications. I mean, it's literally designed to alter the chemical makeup of the brain, and we humans are a lot more stupid than we like to think. So there is a lot we do not know about these medications. A fish with brain damage could see that mental illness medication is potentially way more dangerous than sitting on a couch complaining about your problems to a professionally certified nerd. More on this later, okay? But nevertheless, despite our infinite ignorance on the topic of mental illness medication, we still manage to, make them. And I'm going to explain to you how now. Serotonin is the neurotransmitter in that big ol' brain of yours that generally makes you feel all good and stuff. Dopamine is also what makes you feel all good and stuff. However, the goodies you feel from dopamine are much more temporary than the goodies you feel from serotonin. Serotonin works on a longer timeline, which is why most antidepressants obstruct the serotonin in one's brain from breaking down. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, increase serotonin levels in the synaptic cleft. SNRIs, or serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors. I hate big, fat, sciencey, big, fat words. Increase serotonin and norepinephrine. It'll take about 3 to 5 weeks to see any results from antidepressants. ADHD medications are usually stimulants, because stimulants are the bestest in the westest in terms of the pharmaceutical treatment of ADHD. Rather than increasing serotonin levels like antidepressants, stimulants increase dopamine levels to make one more focused and less bored. It's basically getting high, but, well, there's really no buts. You're just getting high, you fuck! There's methylphenidate, sold under the name Ritalin or Concerta, dexmethylphenidate, sold under the name Focalin, various amphetamine salts, sold under the names Mideus, and, if you're a student and you wish you were never born, you absolutely know this one. Adderall, dextroamphetamine sold under the name Dexedrine, lisdexamphetamine sold under the name Vyvanse, and literally meth. Awesome! Cool! We know how these medications work, we know how to make them, we know how to use them, and most importantly, we can justify taking lots and lots of meth! That's what we do know, and it's great. Sure, yes, but there's much, much more that we don't know. For example, like I said earlier, we still have no idea what causes these disorders in the first place. Some hereditary connections have been found related to mental illness, but there have been no precise or unclouded biomarkers between the two. About a third of all psychiatric patients will be readmitted within a year of release. Why, you might ask? Well, it's under research. There's no shortage of worries in the subject of the medicalization of mental illness. And one of the more prominent worries is that the long-term effects of giving stimulants like meth to kids who just can't sit still and do their addition homework like good boys and girls, and instead wanting to do terrible and evil things such as, playing outside with friends, looking at some ants, maybe even climbing a god-forsaken tree, has not been researched enough to be safe. Even the idea of psychiatry itself has been questioned by some behavioral psychologists due to the fact that psychiatry relies on occurrences that are simply not possible with our monkey technology in this day and age to observe. Unfortunately, the extensive research has had no effect on psychiatric diagnosis, which still relies exclusively on fallible, subjective judgments rather than objective biological tests. This is a quote from Alan Francis, who happens to be an acclaimed psychiatrist. He is a former chairman in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Duke University School of Medicine. This quote was taken from one of his papers entitled The New Crisis of Confidence in Psychiatric Diagnosis. Shit, we don't even know what the hell qualifies as a mental disorder. We are diagnosing people and we do not really know what we are diagnosing them of. In the scientific discussion on what qualifies as a mental disorder, one extreme argues that mental illnesses are 100% objective and matter of fact, The other extreme argues that it just depends on what one thinks is normal, not very objective or scientific. The question then becomes, who is just a weirdo and who is mentally fucking ill? And the unknowns are seasoned rather generously with some pretty not so pleasant side effects. For example, on some ADHD medications, the FDA has added black box warnings. Black box warnings are the worst of the worst when it comes to warnings on medical products. They indicate that there are some pretty yucky side effects, such as, maybe some diarrhea, maybe a bit of a cough, and if it's extra bad, one might even get the sniffles. Oh yeah, and a teensy-weensy bit of death. In the case of ADHD medications, the black box warnings inform that abuse may or may not lead to grave depression during withdrawal, dependence on the drug, or even psychotic episodes, which are otherwise lovingly known as losing touch with reality itself. In 2009, the FDA reviewed 49 clinical trials of ADHD medications and found that around 1.5% of children showed symptoms of psychosis or mania as a result of the medication. Almost half of these kids hadn't even had their 11th birthday yet. And I know 1.5% doesn't sound like a lot. I mean, with a figure that low, chances are they were probably showing symptoms of psychosis or mania before they even took the medication, right? No. In around 90% of these instances, the kids had no reported history of anything like this happening at all. The most common symptoms were lovely hallucinations of insects, worms, or snakes. How fun, How to Traumatize a Child 101. And for antidepressants, it's been concluded by some researchers that over the long term, the evil outweighs the good, suggesting that apoptosis, or the death of one's cells, permanent neuronal damage, and interference with many serotonin-regulated processes are the result of taking antidepressants. I'm no expert, but that sounds like trying to repair a window with a goddamn mace. And want to know the best part? Some scholars and even some professionals in the field, such as Paul-Michel Foucault, a French philosopher, writer, and political activist, David Graham Cooper, a South African psychiatrist, and Thomas Szasz, a Hungarian-American academic and psychiatrist who you'll hear much more about later in this video, have all come to the conclusion that, drumroll please, psychiatric medication is a placebo. And this isn't a baseless claim. 21 of the antidepressant medications that were prescribed the most were found to be only slightly better than placebos for the acute remedy of depression in adults, according to a 2018 study. And in other research, it's been decided that most, if not all, of the success of antidepressants are only because of the placebo effect. The medicalization of mental illness is a very dangerous game to play because we do not know what we do not know. And in this game, the costs of making a mistake are the minds of our fellow humans, those who are at a point where they are especially fragile, those who are in need of help. There is currently much risk in this world for very little reward, if any at all. Sure, one day we could crack the code and solve mental illness forever through the use of medications. The potential reward is limitless, but humanity's day of complete emotional prosperity is not today. In this field, we are young and we have a lot to learn. And we, as a species, tend to learn best through experience. And in abstract fields such as mental illness, our experience comes from experiments, meaning that all that we are doing, all of the medications that we are prescribing, are simply part of one immense, all-encompassing experiment. And corruptly, one of our main test subjects seems to be children. For those with ADHD, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends that 4 to 5-year-olds take methylphenidate if behavioral interference didn't work well enough. For 6 to 11-year-olds, both behavioral therapy and medications done together are recommended, as in this age range, stimulants seem to be more effective. For 12 to 17-year-olds, it's recommended to use psychosocial interventions combined with medications. 62% of 2 to 17-year-olds took ADHD medication if they were diagnosed with ADHD, according to the CDC in 2016. If the FDA has labeled a medication with one of these stimulants as a treatment for ADHD, amphetamines and dexamphetamines are allowed if you are 3 years old or older. Lisdexamfetamine, methylphenidate, and in rare cases, methamphetamine is allowed if you are 6 years old or older to treat ADHD. Students using stimulants, regardless of whether they can obtain legally or not, has been proven to happen time and time again. Because the shit one has to do as a student is so mind-numbingly boring that oftentimes the only way one can concentrate or let alone stay awake in the first place, because students are so sleep deprived, is to literally do drugs. It's hilarious to me. The education system takes the idea that doing drugs is bad and they shove it down your throat every opportunity they get. It's pretty backwards. Don't do drugs, kids! You fat, stinky piles of horse feces. You are the reason kids are doing drugs in the first place. I can smell your bullshit from inside of a compost bin. I am surrounded by fish bones and vomit, and I still think you stink more. Anyways, the medicalization of mental illness in children isn't exactly done discreetly. In fact, it's done completely shamelessly, and if anything, the concept is being advertised, with all of the side effects, and more importantly, all of the unknowns. Is it really such a good idea to be giving these medications out unless it's absolutely necessary? No, it's not. But this isn't just some unfortunate accident. There is a reason this is done, and it's much more sinister than it appears to be. Do you remember the man I talked about earlier, Alan Francis, the acclaimed psychiatrist, the former chairman in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Duke University? He was concerned about a little thing called unpredictable overdiagnosis, which is exactly what it sounds like. In 1987, the rates of medical treatment for ADHD in children averaged at around 0.9 children out of 100. By 1997, it was 3.4 out of 100. In 2011 to 2012, the CDC found that 11 out of 100 kids between 4 and 17 years old had received an ADHD diagnosis at some point, a 41% increase in over just 10 years. Do you really think that in 10 years there was a 41% increase in the number of children with ADHD? What? No. The typical response to an observation like this is that the number of people with ADHD isn't actually growing. It's just that people are simply becoming more aware of this debilitating mental illness. So this is an awareness thing, not a spreading out of control disability thing. Awareness. Let's talk about that. There was an American activist, writer, and psychologist named Paula Kaplan, who died just under 2 years ago. She has won many prestigious awards from the University of Toronto and Harvard. She was not one to bullshit. She held the belief that those who showed signs of mental disorder were being slapped with a psychiatric label. Psychiatrists often focus on nothing but checklists. They are not interested in you or your actual problems or the solutions to your problems. They are only focused on giving you a diagnosis, which Kaplan argues can actually hinder the process of your recovery by distracting you with the wrong problems. They want you to think that the only solution to your problems is not the solution that will actually help you the most. But why? Why would they do that? Why? Why? Alan Francis, Robert Spitzer, who have both worked in the American Psychological Association, Peter Breggin, Thomas Saz, Paula Kaplan, all prominent psychiatrists or psychologists, and even outsiders such as Stuart A. Kirk, who is a former psychiatric and social worker who also holds a chair in social welfare at UCLA, have all been blaming psychiatry of one thing that has been the cause of all these numbers to reach these ungodly heights. One thing that is the reason mental illness is everywhere. That one thing being the systemic medicalization of normality. In 2002, an editorial in the British Medical Journal cautioned against the concept of disease mongering, where the specifications of an illness stretches to the point where normal and personal issues become medical issues. Ever since ADHD has been seriously considered as a mental illness, nobody has really understood anything about it. Nothing is concrete. Some believe ADHD is a genetic condition, and others believe that it's entirely normal behavior. Depression, anxiety, ADHD, these are not as fundamentally biological as most have been led to believe. Personal problems like poverty or unfulfillment or loneliness might be a better explanation of behavioral problems than just blaming it on one's brain being inherently problematic. These mental issues may not even be issues at all. They could simply be a natural part of being human. At least, that's what Thomas Saz insisted in the book he wrote titled The Medicalization of Everyday Life. The Book of Woe, written by a psychoanalyst named Gary Greenberg, contends that mental disorders are simply different ways to categorize natural suffering in a way that medicalizes the problem. But for God's sake, why? Why are they doing this? What is the point of making normal problems medical ones? Well, I can tell you with a fair amount of certainty that the point is not to help you. The point is not to make you feel better. The point is not to make you happier. Just like with all soulless, gigantic corporate entities, the point is undoubtedly profit. From promoting the notion of self-diagnosis in every corner of the internet, to taking measures that allow people to access medications as easily as possible, like allowing daily dispensation of ADHD medication in the morning so a kid doesn't have to take their medication at school, to pushing the idea that you, yes, you, who happens to have normal problems that normal people have may have a mental illness that you need to get diagnosed. Oregon Health and Science University researchers approximate that the percentage of people in the US who actually have ADHD is only 3.5%, when the percentage of children who have a diagnosis of ADHD in the US is 9.4%. Children with ADHD diagnoses are getting younger and younger. From just 2000 to 2003, prescriptions for ADHD in children under 5 years old increased by almost 50%. And in the same time frame, expenditures on drugs for behavioral problems increased by 77%. What the hell is happening? The sales of drugs related to behavioral disorders are snowballing, and they are increasing more rapidly than antibiotics and asthma treatments and any other medicine that children take. Keith Connors, the psychologist who literally set the standards for diagnosing ADHD, after half a century of trying to validate ADHD as an actual problem, questioned and doubted the rates of ADHD diagnosis. And he even said that the growing rates are a national disaster of dangerous proportions. He has said, the numbers make it look like an epidemic. Well, it's not. It's preposterous. The increasing rates of these behavioral disorders genuinely do make it appear like an epidemic. But even according to the man who dedicated his life to spreading the word about behavioral disorders, it's not. He even said this is a concoction to justify the giving out of medication at unprecedented and unjustifiable levels. Anybody who even has a crumb of a problem that may or may not be a distant cousin's friend's nephew's dog of a mental illness is told that they undoubtedly are sick in the head and that taking medication is the best thing they can do for themselves. And this plot to take as much money as possible the pharmaceutical industry has disguised as a morally righteous endeavor has worked flawlessly. In 2012, ADHD medication sales were at almost 9 billion, and only a decade before it was over 500% less at 1.7 billion. Now, in 2023, the ADHD drug industry is worth 32.24 billion. Shire plc, the current largest ADHD medication manufacturing company, who has many brands of medication including Adderall, financially supported the sale of 50,000 copies of a comic book in which superheroes tell kids that medicines may make it easier to pay attention and control your behavior. Attention Deficit Disorder, or ADD, is an old name of ADHD. Roger Griggs, the man that in 1994 first introduced Adderall to the world, played a little game with the name, All for ADD. ADD for all. Adderall. ADD for all. ADD for all. ADD for all. ADHD for all. It's shameless. The pharmaceutical industry is advertising the notion that you are not mentally well, and in the process they're convincing people that they aren't okay, when in reality they are. It's a reverse placebo, all to be profiting off of the downfall of the people. Some even say that the motivation for doing this goes beyond just profits, that it's done for something else as well, something even more sinister: power. There are a good number of sociologists who believe that the conceptual existence and medicalization of ADHD is to medicalize those who don't conform with what they are supposed to. ADHD specifically because it makes the issue of poor achievement in schooling a medical problem when it never has been and still isn't. Sociologists like Irving Goffman are of the belief that the explosion of mental illness is meant to label those who don't conform to the powerful, thereby entirely discrediting them. Because who would ever listen to someone who's clinically insane? And that the medications are simply an attempt to control these non-conformists. For ADHD medicine, they'll say things along the lines of, all changes for the better will stop, and you'll return to what you were before you started if you stop taking these medications, so you better keep taking them forever. And once again, this plan is working. In 2013, in the United States, antidepressants were the most prescribed medication within the entire country. Despite the attested and inconclusive evidence on whether or not these antidepressants are actually beneficial at all, kids are still using them more and more because the rates of prescriptions for them just keep increasing and increasing. By 2019, 15.8% of adults in the US had taken medication given by prescriptions for mental illness, according to the CDC. In the US, at some point in their lives, 46% of people meet the qualifications to have a mental illness. That is practically average. Can it really be considered a disorder at that point if 1 in 2 people have had it? If one is constantly distressed or sad or anxious or distracted, according to clinical psychiatry, they have an internal disorder and they are mentally ill and they need treatment for their illness. But at the same time, if one is constantly distressed or sad or anxious or distracted, couldn't that mean they are simply facing a situation or a problem where it makes sense that they feel these ways? Couldn't that mean that there are social or structural issues that need to be addressed. Couldn't that mean that something is simply wrong with their life and they need to find what it is and fix it? According to clinical psychiatry, no. Everything is fine all the time. There are no problems with the way the world works. If there happens to be a problem, it's always you. You are the problem, not your life, not your situation, you. In case you haven't left your house in the last month, that right there is the sun. And right now it's setting. I'm going for a walk, and by the time the sun has crossed the horizon and twilight has begun, my goal is to have convinced you that despite everything I just shouted for the last few minutes, still, not everything is, shit? I challenge you to watch or listen to these last few minutes without clicking away for some more quick satisfaction. It's just going to be you, me, the sun, the floor, the ants, the voice in my head telling me I forgot to close the garage. Damn it, I hate everything. I mean, what? Yeah, just you and me and some real talk. Cool? Cool. And honestly, my god, I'm so sick of looking for stock videos. I wish I could just make videos like this from now on. But unfortunately for me, I'm not stupid enough to think that anybody wants to listen to this garbage without fun little visuals. But I'm too stupid to think of a way to have visuals that aren't a pain in my ass to make. So yeah, I'll probably be doing this for a while. Anyways, the main thing that I wanted to talk to you about is suffering. Today, it's not uncommon to find people who believe that suffering is only special to them. I have friends who did or do believe it, and naively, I even used to believe it myself. It's hard not to fall into that line of thinking with all this modern garbage telling everybody that everybody is special. Like I said in one of my previous videos, by definition, that is impossible, you silly bags of flesh. Suffering isn't just a miserable part of life that only the unlucky have to deal with. No, suffering is an inescapable part of the human condition. It's universal. Everybody suffers sometimes. No amount of medication can change that. I think that mental illness is often just delusion, but understandable delusion, because everybody wants to be happy. Nobody wants to suffer. The idea that just popping some pills will make all your problems go away is a very nice one. And the dream of constant happiness is irrefusable. But sadly, no matter how bad we want it, it's still a dream. It's a delusion. It's simply not in our biology. Suffering doesn't mean you are mentally ill, it means you are human. And convincing yourself that you are mentally ill so there is nothing you can do to help yourself, and that the only way out is this magic pill, is never going to help you. No matter how magical said pill is, taking a pill will never change your reality. If your life sucks, no matter how many pills you take, your life will still suck. So maybe instead of giving up because of the illusion that you have no control, maybe instead take action to make your life better. Suffering is inescapable, yes, but not all suffering is equal. You can do things to make your life better. No matter how doomed you think you are never doomed. But still, the fact remains, even though suffering is sometimes worse than other times, no matter what, it's still here sometimes. No matter how hard we try to be like them, we aren't children anymore. If you're anything like me, the first thing you ever tasted in your childhood was pure bliss because of your pure innocence, or ignorance depending on who you ask. I spent so long trying to get back to my childhood happiness. But as I grew older and older, I realized I will never be like that again. I could own the world, but still, I would never get back to that one thing that makes childhood so magical. Innocence. It's one of life's cruelest jokes. The first place you ever go in life is paradise, but you have to spend the rest of your life knowing you will never be there again. Owie, that stings, doesn't it? But there is a reason this is the way it is. Imagine if everybody on this planet was always satisfied and happy with anything and everything. Imagine if suffering never existed. Well, if there's no problems to fix, why would we try to fix them? What would be the point of building cities or restaurants or airplanes or flip-flops or Minecraft or anything? If we were satisfied with everything all the time, we would have died out before we even knew how to know. So suffering has to exist. It's our brain's little trick to keep us on our toes. For innovation, advancement, or technology to happen in any capacity, suffering must be present as well. And suffering never fails to show up eventually. But, you know, the saying, all good things must come to an end, only tells half the story. The truth is that all things, whether good or bad or anything in between, must end. And when one thing ends, another thing begins. That is why life is motion. It's never stagnant, it's always flowing. And it may seem impossible to become happy in a life that never settles, but this is actually where true happiness is found. True happiness doesn't come from enjoying the state of life that you're in now, but rather from enjoying the fluidity of life itself. And the way you do that is to learn to love the one thing you will always have no matter where you are and where you are going. yourself. It doesn't matter how life changes. No matter if life goes up, down, left, right, inside out, or backwards, you will always have you. And if you manage to truly love and respect yourself, everything will eventually be fine. You will never be exempt from suffering's occasional visits, but if you love and respect yourself, its visits will be less painful and its stays will be much shorter. If you have yourself backing you up, you can do anything. But it's equally true that if you lose yourself, you lose everything. Well, then the question becomes, how do I learn to love and respect myself? Well, something that worked for me is to imagine that you are not you. You are somebody else in this little scenario. The body you are occupying now is of somebody named, Max. But in real life, outside of this scenario, the person you are as you're watching this video is not Max. Let's say the person you really are in real life is Jesse. You're just taking the perspective of Max in this scenario. So let's say Max, whose eyes you're seeing out of, is sitting in a room, and the door of that room opens, and Jesse, who is you in real life, you who has all your strengths and all your flaws and all your quirks and all your boring parts, comes into the room too. You are staring at Jesse, who is yourself, from another perspective. What aspects would Jesse have to keep and change about themselves to become the coolest and greatest and most inspirational and respectable person you have ever met? What do they have to do to become the person you want to be? Sorry, that was convoluted as hell, but the point is, ask yourself, how are you going to become the person you want to be? What do you have to change about yourself? What do you have to keep about yourself? What do you have to do? Once you have decided what Jesse has to do for you to have the utmost respect for them, now you know what you have to do to gain the utmost respect for yourself. Once you become a person you truly respect, at least in my experience, confidence will come to you. Around a year and a half ago, I was a complete loser. I didn't have any meaningful hobbies, I didn't really take care of my body all that much, I spent all my free time playing video games and watching YouTube, and when I wasn't free, it was because I was always doing something that somebody else wanted me to do. Never what I wanted to do. And believe it or not, despite the glamorous way I was living, I was a total bitch. And one day, I realized that my anxiety wasn't the cause of my life being terrible, but my life being terrible was the cause of my anxiety. And so, armed with this realization, I dedicated a year or so of my life to becoming better. I found what Jesse had to do to become respectable, and I did it myself. Yesterday, I went to my brother's graduation. There were a bunch of people who were my age there because they had siblings the same age as my brother. If you took the person I was a year and a half ago and sent him to that graduation, he would have shat himself and hid in the corner and pretended that he didn't exist so nobody would come up to him until it was over and he could finally go home. But yesterday was a different story. I actually talked to everybody with ease. Conversation with people I've never met no longer was the scariest thing in the world. In fact, it was second nature. Now, I am an introvert. I hate everybody, especially people who are my age, so this was a pretty big switch up for me. I even made some friends. For the first time in a while, they seemed like the nervous ones, not me. Maybe I just had a giant penis drawn on my face that was so menacing that everybody was afraid of me. But my point still stands. I wasn't nervous at all. I didn't give a shit. I don't say this to brag. I say this to prove to you that anxiety is defeatable and to tell you how to defeat it. Yeah, that's right. I just solved anxiety. It's a similar story with depression. If you work at a job you find meaningless or study without caring about the reasons why, or you have no meaningful hobbies or basically any meaning in your life whatsoever, maybe it makes sense that you're depressed. If you don't take care of your body, you don't take care of your mental health, you don't take care of anything, maybe you deserve to be depressed. But depression might not be so evil in cases like these. Maybe it's not a punishment, but an alert, a warning that you have to get your life together. If you take this mindset to heart, good things will happen. The negative could become positive. For example, if somebody calls you fat, maybe you shouldn't get mad at them, but instead start living a healthier life. Then after a little while, maybe they'll see you again and tell you, "Wow, you lost weight." And in this case, instead of saying thank you, say, "Yeah, suck my dick!" And eventually, if you get your life together and get some meaning into your life, the depression will go away. Maybe your constant boredom and inability to focus isn't a sign that you have ADHD, but it's a sign that you're doing the wrong thing. For example, in school, I couldn't focus really at all. It was so bad that in school, I just zoned out all day, and when I came home, I had to relearn everything because I couldn't focus when I was there. It got to the point where many of my friends genuinely thought I had ADHD, and even I thought I had it. I was showing all the symptoms. I even considered getting a diagnosis. But it turns out, no, I don't have ADHD, I just don't give a shit about school. And in case you didn't understand, let me rephrase that for you. I really don't give a shit about school. And you know how I know I don't have ADHD? I can focus for hours and hours and hours at a time on these piles of garbage that I call videos, because I am genuinely passionate about these garbage piles, and I can focus relatively well on basically anything else that I even half care about. It's all about passion and purpose. If you can't focus, maybe you're wasting your time doing something that means nothing to you. If you do something you find important, I bet your ADHD will magically somehow disappear. Then again, these are just my thoughts. They aren't to be taken as fact, but opinion. But even if I am wrong, even if everything I just said in this little walking segment is completely false, what is the use in believing otherwise? What is the point in believing that there is nothing you can do to improve your anxiety or depression or ADHD other than taking questionable substances with even more questionable results? Even if the idea of having control over your life is an illusion, I still think it's better to be punching into the void without knowing if your actions have any effect than to not be trying anything at all. Hope and hopelessness are equally uncertain. So what's the point in feeling hopeless? What's the point in doing nothing? There is no point in nothingness. So even if I am wrong about everything I just said, even if this entire video was 100% useless and stupid and useless, no matter what, there is still one takeaway that you should have from watching this video, and that is to never lose hope over your life. Not the kind of hope where you're waiting for something or someone to swoop in and change your life and save you, but the hope that you can change your life and you can save yourself. Because you can. The existence of the concept of mental illness has distorted the perception of so many people's view on suffering. But let this be a reminder to those who are lost. Life isn't a competition where the winners are those who suffer the most. The winners are those who suffer the least. And feeling bad about yourself for feeling bad about yourself is how you lose. Convincing yourself that you are mentally ill and there is nothing you can do to improve your situation is the same as cutting off your legs in the foot race of life. You don't need medication. You don't need to feel bad about yourself. All you need is hope and action. Your hope is the firewood, your action is the spark. And together they can light up the woods and warm the souls of you and everybody else who needs the heat in these snowy times. Now, remember our little bet that I could convince you that everything is basically fine before the sun has set? Well, let's see. Did I make it? Huh? Oh, fuck. Look at that weird little thing. Well, saw a little one too. Where'd he go? Is he gonna come eat me? Fight me, little bitch. Yeah, that's what I thought. There he is. Oh, little bastard. Yeah, run away. You're scared. You suck. Just kidding. It's cute. It's very cute. I don't know what I'm saying. Okay, I'm gonna go bye.